Everyone says to choose your enemies carefully, but also choose your friends carefully, because they can become enemies. This is a story about a friendship between women that ended very tragically. The protagonist of today's case is Renee Marston from Sydney, Australia. She grew up with her 3 siblings in the family of Teresa and Mark Marston. There was always a warm atmosphere in her home, but Renee was particularly close to her mother. They had a wonderful relationship, and Teresa described her daughter as a very kind, cheerful, and loving girl. In 2010, Renee turned 18. At that time, she worked in a hair salon as a foreman and administrative assistant. In the salon, she met a man named Angus, who also worked there. At first, they didn't notice each other, but then Angus realized he had fallen in love. It took him a long time to muster the courage to approach the girl and tell her about his feelings, until he discovered that Renee had feelings for him too. Within a few weeks, they became inseparable, and 2 months later, they made plans for their future life together. But soon, their relationship came to an unexpected and heartbreaking end. One day, Renee received a message from Angus. He wrote that he had only been using her all those months and often had a wild desire to sleep with other women. At that moment, Renee's world turned upside down. A measured life, plans for the future, and happy moments all seemed so insignificant to the betrayed girl that she just wanted to disappear somewhere. She stopped going outside, stopped eating, and was ready to spend days under the covers. In high school, Renee had a friend named Camilla Zidane. Because each had their own private life, the girls spent most of their time apart. But when Camilla found out about the trouble in Renee's relationship with her boyfriend, she dropped everything and rushed to cheer her up and support her through her grief. Camilla advised her to just spend time with other guys. She even had a suitable candidate for her. Camilla said she knew a man she believed would be good for Renee and could help her forget about Angus. It was Braden Spiteri. He was once Camilla's friend, but their relationship didn't work out because they weren't compatible. However, she was 100% sure that Renee and Braden were meant for each other. She didn't mind her friend dating Braden because she couldn't find a better partner. At first, Renee refused to meet anyone. She didn't want to look at guys at all, but as the initial pain of the breakup subsided, she decided to give Braden a chance. Thus began their phone romance. From the first message, Renee felt incredibly close to this man. She hadn't seen him in person yet, but she already felt that invisible connection you get when you meet a soulmate. They constantly texted each other on social media, exchanging countless messages day and night. Braden was 23 years old. He was a graduate of an exclusive royal school and came from a wealthy family that owned a profitable construction business. When Renee told her mother Teresa about Braden, she was incredibly happy. He seemed perfect to her. There were many commonalities between them, and the young man wanted everything from life that Renee herself dreamed of. The only downside was that Braden was always busy. When it came to dating, he didn't refuse to meet, but he always had an excuse for why they couldn't spend time together. In January 2012, a few weeks after their relationship began, Renee went on a 2-week family cruise. During this trip, she had no cell service at all, so she was out of range for a while. As soon as she returned home, she received devastating news from Braden. Long ago, a man and his close friend were involved in a serious motorcycle accident. The friend didn't survive. Braden was driving the motorcycle. Investigations revealed that he was negligent and inattentive as a driver, so he was charged with negligent homicide. During the proceedings and court hearings, he couldn't tell her about it. He was afraid that this would upset the girl he liked. But now that he had been sentenced to 2 years in prison, he couldn't keep her in the dark. Renee was devastated by this terrible news, but still decided to continue the relationship. After Braden was arrested and put behind bars at the Goulburn Correctional Center, he was allowed to use a phone. Braden and Renee resumed contact, and the messages reached a new level. They couldn't talk on the phone and only exchanged messages because he told her he risked losing phone privileges if he was caught talking. As for visits, he waived that right to shorten his sentence and try to be released by Renee's 21st birthday. He dreamed of celebrating this event with his girlfriend. Renee was compromising, at least for the moment. She believed that 2 years would pass unnoticed, and then they would marry, and nothing could separate them. For the sake of a future together, she could endure some restrictions, because now it was about overcoming this short, difficult time. Although Spiteri was behind bars, they spent a lot of time online discussing their wedding, honeymoon, and what life would be like after their marriage. Renee even reached out to the consulate to ensure that Braden could travel abroad for their honeymoon despite his criminal record. In turn, Braden found opportunities to send her flowers and gifts to make her happy. He fully understood how difficult it was for her to cope without physical contact, so he offered her to satisfy her intimate needs, not with other men, but with his best friend, Camilla. He had no objection to Renee's contact with the girl and would even be happy if she took up his offer. But Renee categorically refused this idea, saying she would simply wait for him to come home. The same couldn't be said about Camilla. She seemed very interested in the topic of intimacy with Renee. The friend constantly asked for details of the correspondence with Braden, inquired how she was dealing with her physical needs, and sometimes became very intrusive. Camilla called several times a day. If Renee didn't answer, she bombarded her with hundreds of messages. Strangely, she became jealous of Renee's other friends. Even if the girl spent the entire day with her mother, Teresa, Camilla would complain. One night, she called Renee 54 times. The next morning, Renee answered her and said that she was being very possessive and it was going beyond all reasonable limits. Instead of apologizing for disturbing her, Camilla showed up at Renee's house and began to scold and attack her. Truly rude and unpleasant things came out of Zaidan's mouth, things Camilla never expected to hear from someone she considered her best friend. After a verbal tirade, Camilla suddenly stepped forward and tried to kiss Renee on the lips. But Renee rejected this intimacy, as she was only physically attracted to men. Camilla didn't give up. She somehow persuaded her friend to have a physical relationship with her, after which Renee talked to her mother, Teresa, and said they had experimented. Renee was once again convinced that same-sex love wasn't for her, and hurried to tell Camilla. After this incident, the friends decided to leave everything as it was and forget about the event. But despite everything, Zaidan continued to act strangely. Renee even showed her mother several emails from Camilla, in which she expressed her unwavering love and desire to be together. The friend wrote that Renee wouldn't escape her feelings, and that no one would love her more than Camilla. Camilla promised to become one with Renee and follow her everywhere if she rejected her. Renee would eventually become her steady girlfriend. Teresa listened to her daughter's revelations and was worried. In an emotional outburst, some people could do terrible things out of love and then regret it. Therefore, she advised her daughter to end the friendship without giving reasons for the breakup. The woman assured her that Camilla would calm down over time, find a young man, and forget her fantasies. But Renee wasn't ready to stop everything all at once. Then Teresa asked her to at least be very careful. When Renee had no choice but to end their decades-long friendship to protect her peace, Camilla literally lost her mind. She became cruel and nervous but still kept in touch with Renee. At first, Renee simply ignored her. Over the next week, her relationship with Braden also began to strain because he often talked about Camilla and tried to persuade his friends to reconcile. After his persistent persuasion, Renee even made several attempts to break up with him. But every time she ended her relationship with Spiteri, something tragic happened in his life, and he turned to her for help. The kind Renee felt sorry for the guy who had suffered so many misfortunes at once and returned every time. At first, the friend said his mother had a brain tumor. This was a blow to him because he couldn't be near her at that moment. On another occasion, he was attacked in prison and seriously injured. Just as Renee felt that Braden was becoming toxic and was ready to denounce it, something had to happen. Each time, her parents convinced their daughter to end the relationship with this man, or at least not refuse to date and communicate with other men who showed her attention. They hoped she would leave him forever as soon as the bond with Braden weakened. To atone for his guilt, Braden even contacted her parents several times to convince them that he was truly suitable for their daughter and had the best intentions for Renee. He continued to send love messages to his girlfriend and urged her to reconcile with Camilla and ultimately forgive her. It worked. Renee reconnected with the only person who had always supported her relationship with Braden. 3 months into their relationship, the incredibly in-love Renee went to a tattoo studio with her best friend as moral support and got Spiteri's name tattooed on the right side of her chest. One afternoon, Renee's mother, Teresa, was browsing social media and came across a photo posted by her daughter's ex-boyfriend, Angus. She liked the photo and left a reaction without hesitation. Somehow, Braden noticed Teresa's activity and concluded that she did it deliberately to reconcile Angus with Renee. He sent her a very angry, rude message saying she had betrayed him and was a useless mother because she didn't support her daughter's feelings for Spiteri. He was actually furious and said many nasty things. After this incident, Renee's parents' feelings towards her boyfriend only worsened. They considered him rude and arrogant. No matter how hard their daughter tried to reconcile, Teresa remained persistent. A few months later, her mother agreed to talk to Braden. She offered him a compromise, to give Renee freedom at least until his release from prison. If her feelings didn't cool during this time, Teresa would change her attitude towards him. Surprisingly, the young man agreed. He told Renee that he still loved her and was determined to marry her as soon as he was released, but would give her complete freedom for now. The girl took this opportunity and soon started dating her colleague, Ian. Renee's parents were pleased that Ian was not like Braden. He had good manners and knew how to behave. They already hoped everything had changed. But Spiteri, who closely followed Renee's life, immediately noticed changes in her. He learned about Ian and started terrorizing the guy online to scare him away from his girlfriend, whom he had freed. Renee asked Braden to stop texting her, but eventually resumed regular communication at the friendship level. Renee quietly continued her relationship with Ian, thinking she had sorted everything out with Spiteri. In October 2012, she went on a business trip and was photographed in a hotel room next to a mirror. She later uploaded the photo to social media. She didn't expect this photo to elicit a reaction from Braden. He noticed a pair of men's shoes in the background and flew into a delusional rage, accusing her of cheating. Renee had to restore order again to maintain the friendship, explaining that they were Ian's shoes. But Spiteri didn't calm down. He somehow got the guy's number and started threatening him. Despite all his attempts to ruin his girlfriend's life, Renee and Ian got engaged on New Year's Eve. Now, constant contact with the ex was a big problem, and Ian informed his fiancée and gave her an ultimatum, either him or Braden. The time for the man's release was gradually approaching. It was supposed to happen in the fall of 2013. Renee knew about it and weighed the pros and cons for a long time, but in the end, she chose the love of her life, Braden. They started working together again to restore their relationship, but everything was very difficult. The girl was tormented by emotional swings. Braden said his father was pressuring him to take over the family's multi-million-dollar construction business once he was free, but that was not what he wanted to do with his life at all. When Renee asked him to at least listen to his father and think about this together, the man accused her of greed, claiming she was only with him for financial reasons and didn't care about his mental and emotional well-being. Moreover, he constantly blamed her for her relationship with Ian, calling her unfaithful and trying to make her feel guilty every time. This toxicity paralyzed Renee, but within minutes, Braden would switch and become a very loving and caring person again. In the summer of 2013, Camilla went on a family trip to the USA, and Renee took this opportunity to finally end her friendship with her. For the girl, it was easier to do this from a distance. Lately, Zaidan had become extremely intrusive again, using her old tricks of being defiant and possessive towards Renee. Renee was already beginning to fear her friend. So as soon as Camilla landed in the USA, she received a message from Renee asking her never to bother her again and to act like strangers if they met. Before his upcoming parole hearing, Braden told Renee that he couldn't communicate with her for a month. She had just broken up with her best friend Camilla and now had to live another month without Braden. The girl was very lonely all these weeks. She continued to send him emotional and loving text messages, hoping to get a response someday. Renee tried to be patient and wait quietly. When the response finally came, the lovesick girl was surprised by the tone of the message. Braden was very brief and rude. Later that evening, Teresa, Renee's mother, received another message from Spiteri telling her to take care of her daughter's suicide threat. The alarmed woman hurried to ask her daughter about it. Renee said that her relationship with him was finally over, but there was no need to worry. She didn't want to hurt herself. When her mother tried to find out the details, the daughter said that she now knew who Braden was. She assured Teresa once again that everything was fine and she had no reason to worry. Then she got dressed to go out with friends later and left her home in Glebe Harbor. On August 5, 2013, at 5:49 p.m., Renee sent a very long and loving text message to her mother, telling her she loved her and asking for forgiveness. Teresa immediately dialed her daughter's number, but Renee didn't answer. Then the woman called Camilla to find out what was going on, even though they hadn't communicated recently. Camilla also received a similar message. She suggested that Teresa search for her daughter in a place where she thought Renee might go. The two went to the house where Zidane said Braden's sister lived, but no one was there. After that, Teresa contacted the police to report her daughter missing. After some time, the police found Renee's car in Watson Bay, an area outside the city. Inside were an old phone she hadn't used in the last 2 months, a Valentine's card from Braden, and a collage of several photos of him. "I love you, Braden," was written on the dirty car window with a finger. Renee's parents, along with several close family members, started searching for Renee. They stumbled upon a pair of the girl's black ballet shoes. At that moment, the police cordoned off the search area and persuaded the family to go home and wait for the results with their loved ones. Teresa couldn't just sit idly by. She tried to contact Braden, but he didn't answer the phone or read the text messages the angry Teresa sent, convinced that he had somehow contributed to her daughter's disappearance. The girl's father then called the correctional facility where Spiteri was supposedly being held, but there were no records of an inmate by that name. These records were nowhere to be found. Mark immediately reported his concerns to the police. When the officers first searched the Watson Bay area, they didn't find Renee but found video footage of her last moments. Alone, the girl walked the path leading to the edge of the cliff, jumped over the barrier, and looked down. She then took out her phone, sent the last 3 texts, threw it into the sea, and then jumped herself. Her body was never found. Overwhelmed by sudden grief, the family didn't immediately realize that Renee was most likely dead. Her parents were determined to get answers and find out who she had been communicating with and about what recently. As it turned out, Renee had sent Braden a total of 91 text messages before she even left the house to go to Watson Bay. But the guy remained stubbornly silent. Only when Renee took off her shoes and prepared to jump did she receive a reply. Investigators examining Renee's phone records noticed a strange pattern in the messages from Camilla and Braden. Their sudden mood swings were almost identical. When Camilla was cruel to Renee, Braden was inexplicably angry at the girl and vice versa. In happy moments, Braden was also incredibly sweet. Although these messages came from 2 different phone numbers, they actually came from the same person. This meant that Braden Spiteri was actually a fictional character created by Camilla. One of the last messages on Renee's phone was from Braden, stating that he needed a break and was ending their relationship after 18 long months. Renee's colleagues witnessed her emotional breakdown. She began to shake, tears flowed, and she could hardly speak. After calming down a bit, Renee picked up the phone and called Braden in prison for 92 seconds, according to outgoing call records. After the police obtained a search warrant, they searched Camilla's house. Officers found several mobile phones, a torn letter to Braden, and another letter to Camilla thanking her for introducing her to the love of her life and promising to repay her somehow. They also found a photo of the man, presumably Braden, whose real name was Cameron, but he was not the same person Renee had corresponded with for a year and a half. It was a photo of a random guy who had no idea his identity was being used for a virtual romance. Renee spent the last 18 months of her life believing she was in love, but on the day of her death, she realized Braden wasn't real. Camilla admitted she had deceived her best friend by posing as Braden, but since there were no laws in New South Wales at the time prohibiting this, the police had nothing to charge her with. She hadn't extorted money from Renee to prosecute her for fraud. Everything she did was for her own pleasure. In 2020, Renee's parents convinced the authorities to investigate their daughter's death and find out how Camilla directly contributed to it. Camilla was granted immunity in exchange for details of her deception. Camilla, who got away with her actions, claimed that she and Renee were in love, and since the Marston family would never accept this relationship, they created the character Braden together as a cover for their relationship. Camilla also insisted she had no idea about Renee's desire to commit suicide, but those close to the deceased girl believed that ending the relationship between Braden and Renee was just revenge on her friend after Renee finally broke up with her. Camilla was painfully obsessed with Renee but couldn't have her, so she lured her into this online relationship and created a male version of herself. Sadly, this cruel joke led to the death of a young girl. Currently, it is known that Camilla got married, had a child, and is enjoying life. The woman finally decided to partner with a man as she realized same-sex romances were not truly her destiny.
The story shocked all of Greece and became the crime of the century. Had there not been tragic coincidences, the case would have remained unsolved. Roula Pispirigou was born in 1989 in Patras, Greece. She had a sister, Dimitra, who was 8 years younger. The sisters spent most of their time growing up with their grandparents. She was described as a cheeky girl with a lot of temperament. Roula received medical training, becoming a nurse, though she never worked in that field. Over the course of her life, she changed jobs several times, but her greatest passion was soccer. While working as a soccer referee, she met her future husband, Manos Daskalakis. At the time, he was a goalkeeper, and Roula fell madly in love with him. Manos was 19 years old then, and Roula was 22. They went out together and soon she became pregnant. The couple decided to marry. Manos' parents were against it. They were ashamed not only of Roula's strange situation but also of the fact that she was 3 years older. However, that did not stop Manos. The wedding took place in 2012, and afterwards their daughter Georgina was born. She too loved soccer, and her mother took her to training sessions. In 2015, a second daughter named Milana was born. The family with 2 children seemed happy, but behind the closed doors of the house, problems arose. The couple began to argue frequently. Roula suffered from depression and made 2 attempts to end her life, which were unsuccessful. Soon afterwards, a tragedy occurred. On April 13, 2019, little Milana died at the age of 3.5. The girl had been admitted to a children's hospital with symptoms of a rare illness. According to the doctors, it was a form of leukemia that was completely curable. Milana had beaten the illness and was supposed to go home. Nothing indicated problems. On that unfortunate day, Saturday, April 13, 2019, Roula was with her daughter in the hospital. The child was in a good mood. Milana was in good condition and ate a kebab her parents had brought to the hospital. But only a few hours later everything changed dramatically when her father left. According to Roula, she and her daughter went to sleep after her husband left. An hour later they were awakened by a nurse who gave her daughter stomach medication. 10 minutes later at 4:40 p.m., the child began trembling, gasping, and having something like a seizure. Roula tried to help her daughter and shouted, "Milana, Milana, Milana!" It did not help, so she ran out to call the nurses. They began to help the girl, but it was too late. The child died. A medical examiner determined the cause of death to be liver failure and pulmonary edema. The family experienced this grief deeply. The parents drew close together and their marriage grew stronger. In 2021, the couple had their third child, Iris. They were happy again, and it seemed that nothing could disturb their happiness. However, after only 6 months, the little girl passed away. The baby died in March 2021 in her sleep in the family's apartment. She was in the same room as Georgina. According to the forensic report, the little girl died of sinus node agenesis, a degeneration of the heart cells leading to cardiac arrest. Normally this disease occurs in older people and is rare in children, but the doctors assumed it was a congenital condition. On that fateful night, Roula's sister Dimitra stayed over, and the women slept together. Around 7:30 a.m., the baby woke up, her mother got up, and gave her a pacifier. They lay down again and went back to sleep. At 11 a.m., they went to the children's room to wake Iris, but she showed no signs of life. In panic, Rula called her husband and asked him to help her while she tried giving the child mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to get her heart going. An hour later, paramedics arrived and declared the baby dead. Her body was already cold and beginning to stiffen. The second death of a child raised many questions about the mother. Why hadn't Rula called an ambulance immediately, instead trying to resuscitate the child herself and calling her husband? Precious time was lost. Maybe the child could have been saved. Rula explained her actions by saying she was confused and only realized after an hour that she needed to call an ambulance. The family was left with one child, the oldest daughter, Georgina. The relationship between the spouses had already been very tense before Iris's death, and this grief drove them even further apart. Problems in the family escalated, and divorce threatened. Meanwhile, the eldest daughter also had health problems. 15 days after Iris's death, Georgina was admitted to the hospital with seizures. She was pumped for 40 minutes, and thanks to the incredible efforts of the doctors, the girl came back to life. She was diagnosed with heart failure, and a defibrillator and pacemaker were implanted. After that, she remained under medical supervision and was hospitalized several more times with a diagnosis of encephalopathy of unclear etiology. Georgina had seizures whose cause could not be determined. Neuropathological tests were carried out, and it was decided to transfer the girl to another clinic. But suddenly, on January 29, 2022, 9-year-old Georgina died. This event shocked everyone. Her death was especially strange because the girl had no apparent health problems. When the doctors tried to save the child, her mother, Rula Pispirigo, suddenly said in front of everyone, "She's dead, leave her alone, stop trying, it's pointless, Georgina won't come back. She's had enough, and she should rest now." The woman did not appear upset, which surprised the paramedics. Hours after Georgina's death, Rula wrote on her social media page, "I brought you into this world, I gave you life, but I'm mad at you for leaving my arms empty. You were the reason I laughed, the reason I had the strength to go on. You fought until the last moment. You smiled, you looked at us, unable to speak, and in our eyes you found support. Goodbye, my little one, I wish you a lovely reunion with your sisters. For me, you were never gone and never will be. I love all three of you." The woman got tattoos in honor of her children. She got her first tattoo after giving birth, and she had her two other daughters tattooed after their deaths. The deaths of the three daughters seemed too suspicious. They died one after the other within 4 years. In all three cases, the girls' health did not indicate they might pass away. The doctors had initially been optimistic about their recovery and were then extremely surprised by the fatal outcomes. This raised great doubts among everyone involved. Some believed the Paspirigo family was cursed and that supernatural forces caused the deaths, but the doctors did not believe in that version and turned to law enforcement, which decided to investigate these deaths. The experts focused on the death of the older girl, Georgina, because they had all the necessary information and the child's body available for further investigation to clarify the case. The investigators questioned the doctors who had treated Georgina. 20 doctors in 5 hospitals in Athens and Patras were interviewed. There were discrepancies between the statements of the medical staff and those of the mother. The doctors claimed something was off with the child. At first, they assumed Georgina had a heart problem, but later it turned out that was not the case. The girl had no heart problems. The mother repeatedly complained of seizures and neurological issues, but examinations revealed nothing. She was diagnosed with gastroenteritis and psychological issues due to the deaths of her 2 younger sisters and was released. Then Georgina came back to the hospital with seizures. No one could figure out what was wrong with her, so they planned to send her to another hospital for a more thorough examination. But there was no time. The girl died, even though she appeared healthy. The nurses who looked after the girl in the hospitals where she had been admitted were also interviewed. They confirmed the doctor's statements. They could not understand what had happened. Shortly before her death, Georgina told them she felt as if she had a bomb in her stomach that was about to explode. Georgina was worried and tried to understand the deaths of her 2 sisters, Milena and Iris, and she was also afraid it might happen to her. She spoke of this fear to the hospital doctors. Rola and Manos spoke out several times, denying any involvement in the children's deaths. They gave several interviews, resolving doubts. They spoke about the drama they had experienced. Both repeated the word suddenly multiple times to emphasize that their children suddenly and inexplicably died without any warning. Suddenly she stopped breathing in her sleep, said the mother about Milena. Toxicological tests didn't show anything, said the father about Iris. The doctor said the child had no heart issues, he said, referring to the sudden death of his eldest daughter. But the investigation continued. It turned out that Rola was present when the children died, all 3 times. However, she denied that this meant anything. Rola claimed, "I'm the mother of the children, so of course I was with them all the time. Why are you so surprised? Don't talk nonsense." The father blamed the doctors for everything, saying he was confused. How can all the tests be good, the child healthy, and then she dies suddenly? That means the treatment was wrong. The toxicological tests, carried out after the deaths of the girls, revealed nothing unusual, but they followed standard procedures, only checking for the most common substances. Therefore, additional expanded tests, not normally performed, were ordered. As I mentioned, in the second case, the baby's death, Rola called the ambulance too late. But it turned out she also did not immediately call for help in the first case. The death of the middle daughter Milena, waiting 35 minutes, by which time the body had already begun to cool. Why did the woman wait so long to call for help? It also emerged that the medical examiner noted small scratches on Milena's nose in his report. Could they be signs of a struggle? Further tests revealed a high concentration of ketamine in Georgina's body, 6 times higher than the normal anesthesia dose. This substance is not sold in a normal pharmacy and is difficult to obtain. It was not used during treatment. It came to light that it was injected into Georgina's body 20 minutes before her death. But who could have injected it, if not the paramedics? The medical staff had last visited the girl about an hour before her death. The mother was the only person in the hospital room as her eldest daughter lay dying, which is why she became a murder suspect. The bodies of the other 2 girls were later exhumed. No ketamine was found in them, but according to a report dated June 20, 2022, both children, 3-year-old Milena and 6-month-old Iris, died from suffocation. Their deaths were classified as homicide. It also became known that a bloody handkerchief was found next to the body of the little girl, which had been taken from the house. Rola pressed hard to get that handkerchief back, but her request was refused. On Wednesday, March 30, 2022, while 33-year-old Rola Pesperigu was at home in Patras with her sister, police officers arrived at the house and arrested her. Rola had medical training and was capable of obtaining substances. She knew what she was doing and acted knowingly. Investigators also found out that she had attended criminology seminars a few years earlier. Her sister Dimitra refused to believe Rola might be responsible for the children's deaths. She said, "I don't believe Rola would harm her daughters. If they didn't die of natural causes and someone is responsible, then let that person be punished." Rola's sister claimed she had been there at the time of Iris's death in the house, but had not seen or heard anything suspicious. Acquaintances, however, described Rola as cold, unemotional, and without feeling. They believed she was quite capable of such an act. During the investigation, a notebook of the eldest daughter was found with the words, "Mom, you're mean." Neighbors stated they had seen Rola severely beat her eldest daughter as a baby. They reported this to the police, which passed the complaint on to social services. Social services kept the family under observation and carried out regular checks at home. On Rola's phone, a message was found that she had sent the day before Georgina's death, saying, "Let's see what happens tomorrow." This message became one of the key pieces of evidence for her guilt. After Rola's arrest, her husband, upon learning of all the evidence against her, was convinced she had done it. The divorce was finalized. Minos was shocked by his wife's deeds and did not understand why she had done them. Minos revealed that at the time of Georgina's death, Rola was pregnant again, but he suspected it was not his child because they had not slept together for a long time. Immediately after Georgina's death, Rola terminated the pregnancy. Minos suspected she had been seeing another man to make him jealous. He also doubted that the middle daughter Milena and the youngest, Iris, were his. When Rola found out about the divorce, she was desperate. She wrote to a friend that she wanted to cast a spell on Minos so he wouldn't leave her. The woman had lost her mind. 2 weeks before Georgina's death, her husband had suggested divorce, and Rula had asked fortune tellers to keep Minos from leaving, but it didn't work. So what might the motive have been? Initially, there was a theory that Rula suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which a parent or caregiver intentionally fabricates or induces an illness in a child or a dependent adult to seek medical help. This theory could not be confirmed. Later it emerged that Manas had a mistress. Rula knew he was cheating on her and was considering divorce. She tried everything to keep her husband, and possibly the death of the first child helped achieve that, as they really did reunite. Or she may have wanted revenge on him. Rula's sister does not believe this version. She says she advised Rula to divorce Manas because of their marital problems. She knew everything but did not want to divorce because of the children, though she cannot believe Rula could be capable of such things. A psychiatrist who spoke with her concluded that all her thoughts revolved around her husband. She was fixated on him, obsessed and very jealous of other women. She saw her children as narcissistic extensions of herself, a woman who did not understand their fundamental developmental needs. An angry crowd of about 500 people came to Rula's house after her arrest and demanded the death penalty for her for killing her 3 children. The mother, the sister, and other relatives of the suspect were in the house at that time. The window of their apartment was graffitied with the words "Death to the murderer," and on the wall there was a cryptic note written on gauze, "I should have let you die. I'm sorry, my soulmate. I didn't know I saved a murderer. I'm sorry, I can't believe it." It was never clarified who left the note. It is assumed that the handwriting was a woman's. The trial in this case is still ongoing. Rula Pespirigu is currently in a VIP single cell with all amenities. For security reasons, she has no contact with other inmates, and she is monitored because they fear she might take her own life. Rula is charged with the murder of 3 children. She continues to deny all accusations. Rula claims she is a victim who has lost her children, her husband, and her freedom. She is certain it is all a misunderstanding, that she will be acquitted, released from prison, and that her relationship with Manas will be restored. She has still not come to terms with the divorce. Her ex-husband wants nothing to do with her. He is with another woman, and they are planning a wedding and want to have children. I will continue to follow the progress of this case and report on the verdict. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves. Eliza Samudio Silva was born on February 22, 1985, near the capital of Brazil. Her father, Luis Carlos Samudio, was an architect, and her mother, Fatima, worked on a farm. The shared life of Luis Carlos and Fatima did not last long. They were both unhappily married and divorced when Eliza was only 6 months old. Luis Carlos was very cruel to his wife. He raised his hands against her, and the woman was several times near death. The man did not want his daughter to stay with his wife after the divorce, so he said he would not give her the girl alive. Fatima had to leave her home without her daughter. She opened a small farm, and met a man there with whom she later had a son. Now Fatima saw her daughter, only very rarely. When Eliza was 10 years old, Fatima had the courage to take the girl without the consent of Luis Carlos. Eliza quickly found a common language with her younger brother, her stepfather, and her mother, and they all lived a quiet and happy life, but it lasted only a year. Luis Carlos took the girl back and forced her to return to him, under threat of death. Eliza did not want to stay with her father because he was very cruel to her. When Eliza became a teenager, he ordered her to entertain his friends for little money, and when she turned 18, she decided to move away from her father to Sao Paulo. Eliza's biggest dream was to become a model and marry a football player. Since her childhood, she loved this sport and dreamed of starting a family with a professional footballer. She arrived in Sao Paulo with little money and knew no one. Eliza decided to look for a job as a model and build a successful career. But unfortunately, not everything went according to plan. She was not accepted anywhere, and she began to sell herself to survive and get some money. It is also known that Eliza appeared in several erotic films while simultaneously trying to find work as a model. Her pictures appeared in Brazilian magazines. Thanks to her connections in the modeling career, she participated in football events where she managed to meet famous footballers. One of them was Bruno Fernandes da Souza, who was born in 1984 in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. He was a goalkeeper in one of the most popular Brazilian teams. The exact date of their acquaintance is unknown, as Bruno could not name the place or time. Mutual acquaintances said they met in 2008 at a barbecue. The footballer confirmed this version but then changed it and said they had met at an adult party, organized by his friend. It was definitely known that Bruno and Eliza were at the mentioned party, and on one of the evenings, Bruno's condom broke, which later turned out to be a very important fact. Eliza became Bruno's lover since he already had a wife at that time. Bruno played for a fairly popular Brazilian team called Flamengo. He was not looking for a serious relationship because he was married and did not want to ruin his reputation. According to mutual acquaintances of Bruno and Eliza, he promised her that he would divorce his wife for her sake. Bruno often spent the night at Eliza, and they spent a lot of time together away from the press, because Bruno did not want any trouble. Their relationship lasted a few months, then Eliza told the young man that she was pregnant. Both remembered that unfortunate night when Bruno's condom broke. He took the news terribly because Eliza was just another distraction for him. Bruno insisted on an abortion, and even bribed some people to gain Eliza's trust and persuade her. But it did not work with her. She wanted to keep the child and become a mother. Of course, led to endless scandals, and the relationship between the two ended quickly. In the same month, in October, Eliza filed a complaint with the police for attempted kidnapping and harassment. She went public and appeared on Brazilian television as Bruno's secretly pregnant lover, but that was not all she claimed. Eliza also said that Bruno was a very violent man, whom she feared. All this was recorded in her statement to the police. Eliza also stated that she was afraid because Bruno might have mixed a miscarriage drug into her food. At that time, the court did not sufficiently examine the case and Eliza's statement, and at the end of the trial, Bruno Fernandes was prohibited from approaching Eliza within 300 meters. Eliza wanted additional protection from Bruno, but the judge decided that additional protection was not necessary, since the two had an unofficial relationship. The judge did not even consider the woman's pregnancy. Eliza demanded financial support from Bruno for medical expenses related to her child and for better nutrition, but Bruno refused, claiming the child was not his. He said it could have been from another man since Eliza led a promiscuous lifestyle. She, however, claimed that she had not been with any other man since meeting Bruno. Nevertheless, Bruno continued to deny the fact of his paternity. In 2010, Eliza gave birth to a boy in one of the hospitals in Sao Paulo. The medical care was fully paid for by Bruno, but he wanted nothing to do with Eliza or the baby. He did not see the baby until it was 4 months old. Eliza wanted to give the child his father's surname and suggested Bruno make sure it was his child and take a DNA test. Fernandes agreed. According to Eliza's lawyer, June 4th was the last time she spoke with her friends or family. Judging by her correspondence, Bruno agreed to acknowledge his paternity and help with money, offering Eliza to move to a new apartment that he would pay for himself. Since Bruno was in contact with her, he wanted to withdraw the paternity and child support application she had previously filed with the police. On June 5, 2010, Bruno played with his team for the last time, and Eliza's friends began to worry that she did not contact them. Although Eliza and her mother did not have a close relationship, the woman found it strange that her daughter took so long to call her and tell her about the child. The police began searching for Eliza, and the news of her disappearance quickly reached the press. Naturally, Bruno began to be questioned. He said he knew Eliza but was not the father of her child and claimed it was just an affair. The police had no evidence to link Eliza's disappearance to Bruno, although many suspected the young man knew something about her disappearance. Only on June 24 was there a new lead in the case. An anonymous caller informed the police that Eliza had been murdered, her clothes burned, and her body hidden on Bruno's property. But even after this call, the police could not obtain permission to search Bruno's yard or house, because the judge demanded more evidence. Especially since the footballer was a well-known personality in Brazil, and in case of his innocence, the police did not want to give people a reason to doubt their competence. Therefore, they acted very cautiously to avoid public outcry. A tracking device was installed in Bruno's house. On June 26, just 2 days after the installation of the listening device, Eliza's son was found in the house. The boy was with a woman named Fernanda Castro, one of Bruno's lovers. Fernanda said the child had been left to her by Eliza and added that she had been instructed by Bruno to look after the child. The police found this very strange. They decided to question Bruno and his wife, but it led to nothing. They gave no information and armed themselves with a host of lawyers. Fernanda was taken into custody from the first day of the investigation, and the police waited to find out all the details. On June 20, after the police questioned Fernanda and Bruno and his wife refused to speak, a judge approved the search of one of Bruno's apartments. In the house, women's clothing and diapers were found. Bruno's Range Rover was also examined, where blood stains were found that matched Eliza's blood after DNA analysis. They also found a pair of sunglasses and black high-heeled shoes that Eliza's friends quickly identified as her belongings. The police had enough evidence to suggest that Bruno had something to do with Eliza's disappearance, but it did not seem enough for the judge, and the case was not pursued further. On July 6 of the same year, another important piece of the puzzle, one of the most important in this case, emerged. The police arrested a 17-year-old teenager named Sergio, Bruno's cousin. He shared an interesting story with the police. The boy said he was involved in the murder of Eliza, which was planned by Bruno from start to finish. Sergio stated that he was together with Bruno's best friend and another male hitman. According to Sergio, Bruno wanted to get rid of the annoying woman who put too much pressure on him. He was afraid that she would pass more information to the press and ruin his career. Sergio described everything in great detail. Bruno invited Eliza to his home to discuss the money for the baby, the DNA test, and the child's surname. Since Eliza did not have a car, the footballer said he would send a driver for her. It was his best friend, Luis Enrique Ferreira, but his goal was not to bring her to Bruno, but to kidnap her and take her life to prevent the collection of child support and save the footballer's reputation. In the car were Eliza and her child, Luis Enrique, and Sergio, who was given a gun. He began to attack Eliza, but she managed to knock the weapon out of his hand. He tried to shoot, but the gun was unloaded. He had only received the gun to intimidate her. Then Sergio hit Eliza several times with the gun on the head until she lost consciousness. After, they took Eliza to Bruno's house, where he was waiting for her. He took Eliza's belongings and burned them. Bruno ordered them to dispose of the body and leave no evidence, but he did not order what should happen to the child. After all these instructions, Bruno flew to Rio de Janeiro. Sergio said Bruno left each of them about $1,700 for the work done. Bruno told Sergio and Luis Enrique to come with Eliza to another of his locations, where a special man was waiting for them. When they arrived with the body, they met a man named Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, a former policeman who now worked in the homicide department. He specialized in disposing of bodies. Everyone who worked with him said he always did his job cleanly and that no evidence was ever found on his hands. Eliza was taken to the guardhouse, and Sergio was with the baby at that time. Marcus took a lot of time to work on the body. He tortured her in a terrible and cruel way. It is not even known exactly how long Eliza suffered at that place until she died. There are several versions that Sergio changed his mind more than once, and some things contradict the official information in the case. Accordingly, they forced Eliza on June 8 to call her friend and say that she and Bruno were fine, that he had acknowledged his paternity and would fulfill all her demands. They also made her say that she would leave the country, but none of Eliza's friends received such a call. Eliza's lawyer said that the last time she was in contact with her family or friends was on June 4, as I mentioned earlier. One of the police versions is that Bruno was with them that day, and wanted to witness Eliza's death personally. Sergio said that after hours of torture she begged for her life, whereupon the murderer strangled her with a tie. According to the police, Sergio handed the child over to Bruno and they left the house. After Bruno left, the murderer cut Eliza's body into pieces and brought the body parts in a black bag to the 4 dogs to eat. According to Sergio, Marcus first threw her hand to the dogs, and after they continued to eat, he disposed of the body completely and took the bones somewhere. The police, however, also found inconsistencies in Sergio's story. According to the friend, Eliza's remains were buried on the same property of Bruno where they had originally brought her, but the police found no bones there. Possibly the men agreed not to name the exact location of her remains. After Sergio's confession, the judge approved the arrest of Bruno and all others involved in the murder. On July 9, The police searched Bruno's apartment, but the footballer was not present. A few hours later, however, Bruno and his best friend drove to the police station themselves to turn themselves in to the authorities. They did so on the advice of Bruno's lawyers. They thought it was the best decision for public image to turn himself in rather than hide in his apartment. Bruno stated that he was completely innocent and had nothing to do with the murder. At the time of his arrest, Bruno had not yet been removed from his football team until the details became clear, but as the case dragged on, his contract was terminated on July 15. The trial was followed by all of Brazil. The footballer was very famous at the time, and all the information Sergio provided was in the headlines of newspapers and magazines. The Brazilian people followed Bruno's case on television. People wanted to know if the police would find Elisa's remains and if the audience's favorite, the famous footballer, had really done something so terrible. While the trial was ongoing, Elisa's family fought for custody of her son. Initially, custody was granted to her father since he was the last person with whom the minor Elisa lived. Elisa's mother, however, immediately went to court to obtain custody, because she did not want the boy to grow up in the same hellish conditions in which Elisa lived. The judge immediately revoked Luis Carlos' custody, since the man had already been convicted of abusing a 10-year-old girl, and Fatima, the boy's grandmother, became the boy's legal guardian. She also requested a paternity test that confirmed that Bruno Fernandes was the father of Elisa's son. The police had to find Elisa's body to prove Bruno's guilt. They searched numerous places where they could have hidden the remains but found nothing. In total, 6 people were arrested. In addition to the 4 men, including Bruno, his wife and Fernando's lover, who was taking care of Elisa's child, were also imprisoned. A few months after the trial, Marcos, the hitman, received 19 years for murder and 3 years for hiding the body, while Fernando Gomez received 5 years because he withheld information from the police and because he was responsible for the kidnapping of Elisa's child. The trial against Bruno and his wife lasted a little longer as he filed numerous appeals and denied any involvement in the case. His wife got off completely without a prison sentence. Sergio, Bruno's cousin, was an important witness in this case. He was 17 years old and was found not guilty by the judge, but in 2012 he was murdered. He was run over by a motorcycle after being followed from his home on his way to work. Thus, the police lost an important witness in this case. Bruno, on the other hand, was sentenced to 22 years in prison in 2013, but in 2017 he was released after another appeal. 4 days after his release, he was accepted into a new football club called Boa Esporte. On April 8, 2017, he played for the new football team. By accepting Bruno into the team, the club lost all its sponsors. On April 25, his appeal was declared invalid, and he was sentenced to serve a full prison term. Bruno and his lawyers, however, argued that there was not enough evidence that he had done anything to Elisa. The new judge stated that the bloodstains of Elisa in his car were enough to continue serving his sentence, and that Bruno, if he wanted a reduction in his sentence, would have to reveal the location of the body. But the footballer continued to maintain his innocence. In 2019, Bruno's lawyer arranged for him to be placed in a semi-open prison. He could walk around freely during the day and return to prison at night. He was accepted by a new football club called Pocos de Caldas, but after a few games, his contract was terminated because he could not actively participate in training due to the semi-open prison. Today, Bruno is still in semi-open prison and is looking for a new football team that will accept him. To this, it is not known where Elisa's remains are located. Sergio, the only witness who provided information to the police, died under very strange circumstances. Bruno continues to claim that he is innocent. He has divorced his wife and remarried. The ceremony took place in prison. In the semi-open prison, Bruno leads an almost normal life. He has a wife, spends a lot of time outside the prison, and can work. Meanwhile, Elisa's mother, Fatima, is searching for the remains of her daughter and raising her grandson. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.
Alcohol destroys families and shatters destinies. People lose all control over themselves and become dangerous. The person featured in today's story experienced all the threats an unpredictable individual can pose. Lauren Malt was born on April 18, 2002, in the United Kingdom. She had 3 younger brothers and thus seemed to have grown up under reliable protection. The relationship among the children was good. They supported each other and appeared to get along well. Lauren, the older sister, would always calm her restless brothers. However, she grew up in an environment far from what she imagined a family home to be. Lauren's father was a cruel man, in stark contrast to her kind mother. Her mother Karen was born in the countryside and grew up in a middle-class family. She met Nigel Malt at college, a sporty man with big career ambitions. Their relationship began after their first meeting, and it seemed to Karen that this was an ideal way to start a family. Karen's enthusiasm, however, was not shared by everyone. Her mother, for example, was direct and advised her daughter to leave him, but Karen did not listen. Initially, the relationship developed normally. The couple appeared to love each other. They got married and had children. Gradually, though, Nigel began manipulating his wife. He behaved in a manner typical of this sort of individual, morally oppressing her and keeping her close through lies and pity. By the time their daughter was born, their relationship was already strained, but Karen persisted, mainly because she was financially dependent on her husband. Owing to her pregnancy, she was unable to complete her education and thus could not count on a good job. Karen had planned to graduate after giving birth, but she had no time because she became pregnant again. Nigel had been dependent on alcohol and illegal substances for a long time. He started in his youth, and by the time of the events in question, he could no longer function without them. It began harmlessly, with smoking illegal substances, but gradually progressed to regular use of harder substances. He suffered from an addiction that brought very unpleasant consequences. Nigel remained a decent person until his addictions took over. From that point on, his behavior changed dramatically. He became increasingly violent and insulting toward his wife. Karen endured his abuse for a long time because she hoped that the situation would change once they had a child. She still remembered what a nice and decent young man her husband had been, the man she had initially fallen in love with. Over time, however, the situation became dangerous. In aggressive states, Nigel began using physical violence. The once peaceful and good-natured head of the family lashed out at Karen more and more often. At first, her dreams of a happy life together seemed to be coming true, and the couple seemed to have a bright future. In her mind, their life resembled the American dream. A young mother dreamed of starting a family, having children, being a housewife, and doing her own thing. Now those plans were shattered. Her husband also had ambitions. He wanted to build a career, and so the two of them initially complemented each other perfectly. Unfortunately, once things began to improve, the young man started consuming alcohol and illegal substances. All of that turned him into a genuine psychopath who was no longer in control of himself. His wife came under repeated moral pressure, and later, physical violence followed. Worst of all, during her school years, it began to affect Lauren as well. Even so, Karen tried with all her might to keep the relationship going. By the time Karen reached a critical point, she already had 4 children with Nigel. In the event of a divorce, there would be extensive legal proceedings, even though there was not much shared property. Yet the prospect of becoming a single mother to 4 children seemed daunting. There were many questions regarding child support and custody. Karen seriously feared that her spouse would try to take the children away from her just to hurt her. Meanwhile, everyone in the family was fed up with the father's inappropriate behavior. Whereas he had once earned at least something and provided for the family, now he was sinking ever deeper, spending almost all his income on alcohol and illegal substances. Karen's greatest concern was that her husband was ruining the children's lives. Their daughter and sons grew up in constant fear, to the point that he drank every day and hit their mother in front of them. Of course, things could not go on like that forever. Her family and friends had repeatedly told her that she should end this malicious relationship, but she had tolerated it out of love for her daughter and her sons. It was now clear that the domestic tyrant could no longer be controlled. Karen decided to tell Nigel she wanted a divorce, which triggered a new outburst of rage. He said outright that he would not pay alimony, but she could no longer live in such a marriage. It all ended with yet another conflict and threats, which only strengthened her desire to leave her inadequate husband soon. In March 2021, Karen Malt went to the police for the first time and reported her husband. She reported domestic violence after another alcohol-fueled argument that ended in a fight. Despite the obvious signs of violence, the police initially showed little interest in the report. In April, however, the woman was beaten again, more severely than the previous month. At that point, Karen was genuinely afraid for her life and for her children's future. She realized she had to act decisively and end the torture once and for all. She went to the police again and filed a report for domestic violence. Up until then, threats to contact law enforcement had helped somewhat to contain Nigel's aggressive temper, but the police's passive attitude only made the situation worse, and the family suffered even more. When the police arrived in March, Karen was again persuaded to withdraw her statement to avoid causing trouble for him. Nigel appeared willing to compromise and even showed interest in an amicable divorce. Unfortunately, it turned out that this was only a trick, and he simply wanted to buy time. After a second severe beating in April, Karen decided not to listen to any more excuses or promises. It is possible Karen's mother would not have let the situation go this far, but Karen admitted that she truly loved this man and hoped, until the end, to restore their former relationship. Besides the intimidation involving the police, Karen managed to rein in her husband's anger for a short while by threatening to leave him, but it only worked temporarily. A similar conversation occurred in March 2021, when Nigel first began threatening to kill his wife. All of this sounded very unsettling, which is why in April, after her husband was taken to the station, she used the opportunity to flee with her children to her mother's house. Meanwhile, the aggressive husband posted bail and was released, pending further proceedings under house arrest. He again tried to appeal to her pity, even threatening to hit himself, but none of that moved Karen anymore. She was determined to go through with it. To show she was serious, Karen tried to obtain a restraining order, but that did not work out. Because of the child and the subsequent lockdown, a deep rift developed in the family relationship. During that time, there were serious financial problems, which led the family's head to drink even more and become increasingly aggressive and violent. His anger was no longer limited to his wife. He attacked Lauren and became more and more rude to his sons. After a trial, Nigel was found guilty of marital abuse and given a suspended sentence. He was prohibited from approaching his wife and children. By this point, he had lost everything. His beloved wife left him because she no longer believed his apologies and promises, and his contact with his children was at risk. His daughter and sons no longer wanted to see him because he was too unpredictable and cruel. His use of alcohol and illegal substances became a daily habit, and he was out of control. Nigel seemed to hope for a new relationship, but Karen was adamant and demanded a divorce. All these events finally made him snap. Despite his promise to refrain from illegal substances, he seemed to be slipping even further. He claimed all this was due to his desire to cope with his problems. The issue of child support had to be resolved, because it was almost impossible for one woman to support 4 children on her own. Karen took a job as a salesperson, but her salary was insufficient. Her daughter took on various part-time jobs to help her mother. Karen's lawyer assured her that custody would not be a problem, since Nigel was a genuine alcoholic and, in view of the abuse allegations, he could be kept away from the children. The relationship with their father had been extremely tense throughout their childhood, so Lauren chose to communicate only with her mother, even into adulthood. Nevertheless, she sometimes saw Nigel to avoid permanently severing contact. Like her mother, she still believed there was hope of saving this man. At the time of the events in question, The mother and her children were still living in the grandmother's house in the small village of West Unch in Norfolk, England. Lauren turned 19 and was dating a man named Arthur. On Sunday, January 23, 2022, her boyfriend drove Lauren to work in the shop where she worked as a salesperson. During the day, Nigel called her several times, but the precise reason for her father's calls remained unknown. She sensed he was likely out of his mind and did not want her workday ruined by unpleasant conversations. On that day, Lauren worked a long shift and was very tired. When she finally got home, she just wanted to rest in her room with her boyfriend because she had another shift the next day. At that time, she was working hard, sometimes doing overtime to save money for her education. Unexpectedly, Nigel called again that evening. Lauren knew he would not be sober on a Sunday evening. She simply ignored his calls, hoping her father would calm down. But he was extremely persistent. Between 6:25 p.m. and 6:55 p.m., he called 19 times. The phone literally rang non-stop, but Lauren stayed firm. Attempts like these to call her, no matter what, had happened often before. Typically, in such cases, her father would start insulting her mother, and her brothers. These calls provided no valuable information but did unsettle Lauren. Unfortunately, ignoring her father forever was impossible, as he lived only 10 minutes away and could easily reach her. Worst of all, once before he had come by under a false pretext and caused a drunken uproar, and there was nothing to prevent a similar incident from happening again. Around 7:14 p.m., Nigel called his daughter, and she finally picked up because she was afraid of making the situation worse. The man spoke with his daughter for a few minutes, but as expected, the conversation was meaningless. Insults and intimidation began immediately. 19-year-old Lauren tried to calm her alcoholic father, but he seemed unable to control himself. According to her boyfriend, Arthur, Nigel arrived at Lauren's home at about 7:21 p.m. Her mother was at work. Naturally, her father was drunk and extremely aggressive. She went outside and tried to calm him down, but he insulted her in every possible way and tried to pick a fight. He swung a crowbar and narrowly missed Lauren several times. His behavior was extremely dangerous. He could not even explain what triggered this outburst of aggression. After trying several times to grab Lauren, he shouted that he wanted to beat up her boyfriend. Arthur had been there the entire time, trying to calm her father. Lauren managed to influence her father just enough to tell him to leave because she refused to speak with him in that state. She tried to get him into his car so that he would drive away. Suddenly, the drunk man started shouting again, got into his vehicle and reversed sharply. Since Lauren was behind the car, he ran over his own daughter. He paused for a few seconds and looked at his injured daughter through the windshield. She was badly hurt, bleeding and begging for help, but he did not even consider getting out of the car or calling an ambulance. Instead, he pressed the gas pedal and ran over Lauren a second time. It all happened so quickly that Arthur did not even have time to react or help her. The commotion attracted the attention of the neighbors, who alerted the police. A man ran into the street and tried to stop the lunatic. The father saw Lauren lying on the ground. She was groaning in pain, seriously injured but still alive. One witness understood that someone needed to call an ambulance immediately because Lauren's injuries made it dangerous to move her. Nigel did not care. He kept saying that everything was fine and that Lauren only had a few scratches. Nigel chased away Lauren's neighbor and her boyfriend. They shouted at him to stop and to call for help, shocked by what was happening. The drunk father had no intention of calling emergency services. Instead, he picked the lifeless Lauren up off the ground and put her in the front passenger seat of his car. She moaned in pain, especially when her father tried to set her on the seat. Because of her injuries, Lauren was unable to keep her balance or even sit upright. She probably had broken bones. Nigel did not even buckle her seatbelt. Almost immediately, she slid off the passenger seat onto the floor, collapsing in an unnatural position. The deranged man drove off somewhere. While driving, he called his ex-wife. Nigel began talking vaguely about some incident, saying he had hurt Lauren by accident and would soon be with her. He was drunk, and his story made little sense. Karen did not really understand what he meant, but she decided to wait for her ex-husband to arrive at her workplace. According to him, his daughter was not seriously hurt. He just wanted to hand her over to Karen so she could take her to the hospital. He himself claimed he could not do it because he had been drinking and feared losing his driver's license. Nigel drove straight to the parking lot of the shop where Karen worked. When Karen saw the condition her daughter was in, she realized that her ex-husband had severely downplayed the seriousness of the accident. Lauren was in critical condition and barely clinging to life. The mother tried to lift her injured daughter off the floor of the car, while Nigel watched in silence. Lauren did not respond to anything. It looked as though she had passed out from the pain. Finally, Karen called an ambulance, and Lauren was taken to the hospital. The doctors determined that her injuries were so severe that she could only be helped at a specialized medical center. The paramedics did everything they could to save Lauren's life. Unfortunately, her heart stopped just a few minutes after she was placed on the operating table. Police officers arrived at Lauren's home, where the crime had taken place. There, they met Lauren's terrified boyfriend and the neighbor who had witnessed the crime with his own eyes. Bloody tire marks were left on the driveway where her biological father had fatally injured his daughter. Unlike most crimes, there was everything needed for an immediate indictment. The coroner had to determine the extent of the injuries inflicted on the victim of the double accident. It was found that Lauren had a broken back, which was why she could not keep her balance and slid onto the floor of the vehicle. Her chest was completely crushed. Several ribs were broken, leading to a tear in her lung and massive internal bleeding. The traumatic injuries to her chest and abdomen were fatal. Many internal organs had been crushed or damaged by bone fragments. It was obvious she had been run over by a car, and after the first time, she might have survived. Even after the second impact, she might have had a chance if she had not been moved, and if medical help had been called immediately. The attempt to put her in the car only made things worse, and the lost time cost her her life. 45-year-old Nigel was immediately arrested. A strong level of alcohol intoxication was detected, more than twice the legal limit for driving. Karen was sure that his aggressive behavior stemmed solely from alcohol or other substances. Of course, that could not excuse his violent actions, but it did add a few more charges. After Nigel was arrested, he refused to cooperate with the police. Although he provided basic details of his name and address, he refused to comment on the incidents. At the preliminary hearing, he pleaded not guilty despite the clear evidence and indications. He called the murder an accident. The father of the deceased claimed that on that evening he had indeed driven to his daughter's house because at first she did not answer the phone and then spoke rudely to him. He said he tried to reason with her, but that had not worked, so he intended to leave and continue the conversation later. As he got into his car and backed out, he felt slight resistance. He thought he had run over a box, a stone, or some other obstacle he hadn't seen in the mirror. He claimed that, without realizing it, he had actually run over his daughter, and that to get past the obstruction, he returned to his starting point and, to his surprise, ran over Lauren again. Naturally, it was all the lie of a coward unwilling to admit his cruelty. Investigators noted how coldly the father spoke about his daughter's death. This case of blatant brutality did not seem to bother Nigel in the least. On the contrary, whenever he spoke of his family, he did so negatively and with contempt toward Karen and Lauren. None of it made sense. The wife of the murderer had been a respectable woman who devoted herself to keeping the family home together. Lauren had grown up to be like her mother, just as upright, despite the difficult family circumstances caused by her father. She neither drank alcohol nor used illegal substances, but instead worked on her education, career, and a better life. The neighbor and Lauren's boyfriend disputed Nigel's claim that it was an accident with a hit-and-run. They stressed that after he ran her over, he stared at her for a few seconds and aimed his headlights at his daughter. Nigel could not have failed to see her. Then he deliberately ran over her a second time. This was no accident. Even if he really had not seen her the first time, the second time she was definitely in his line of sight. The neighbor insisted that there had been a conflict between father and daughter that evening. He had behaved very aggressively, waving a crowbar around and threatening the young people. Even when the man ran Lauren over and saw her through the windshield, he wore a furious grimace on his face. He had no intention of stopping. The neighbor believed that the outburst of violence was triggered by Lauren merely asking him to leave. In fact, the police did not rely solely on witness statements. While the neighbor came outside and tried to talk sense into him, several women in the area filmed the incident on their phones from their windows. This footage was shown in court, and it was clear that the father had intentionally run over his daughter in the videos. The prosecution believed that even the first act had not been an accident. Even the defendant's lawyer admitted it was difficult to dismiss the incident as accidental. Naturally, the defense focused on proving manslaughter, but that argument was unconvincing. Gathering the bloody tire treads and matching them with Nigel's vehicle were mere formalities. They naturally matched perfectly. In view of the overwhelming evidence, the perpetrator was found guilty. In September of the same year, a hearing took place to pronounce the verdict. Nigel received a life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years, after which he can apply for parole for the first time. The court emphasized that Karen's allegations of domestic violence had been taken into account in determining the sentence. The victim's family stressed that they would not be sidelined. Karen told the media that she would personally attend every parole board hearing to prevent Nigel's release. At the sentencing, the 45-year-old man appeared in very poor health. It was reported that his health had deteriorated significantly in prison. Nigel leaned on crutches and moved almost exclusively in a seated position. He never admitted guilt and maintained that it had been an accident. Many believed that he was trying to appease the court by portraying himself as a victim, as he often did with his wife. Others saw it as a deserved retribution from above. In any case, he was in prison, and his health stabilized. Karen Malt was determined to go through with the divorce. She considered it shameful to bear the surname of a man who had murdered her own daughter just because he lost his temper while drunk. He had used his car as a weapon and had run over his daughter twice to give her no chance of survival. In this light, Karen considered the sentence too lenient. She believes Nigel should not be given even a single opportunity for release. Karen insists he is a very dangerous and violent man who completely lost control through reckless drinking and illegal substances. If he ever gets out, she says, the next murder is only a matter of time. Nigel's sons have repeatedly confirmed that they only feel safe if their father remains in prison permanently. The case sparked a widespread public outcry, once again raising the question of how children and wives can be effectively protected from domestic tyrants. Activists called for harsher penalties for people like Nigel, including extending sentences up to life imprisonment without parole. Unfortunately, no significant changes have been made so far. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself.